So hello everyone, this is Jason, also known as Humble Stature, and this is now our third official podcast. We've been out for a little bit, but now we're back and making videos regularly again. And today's topic is going to be on spiritual practices. We want to talk about what's worked for us, what's not worked, as well as getting into maybe a little bit of psychedelics. 420 is coming up, so we'll discuss a little bit about what we've tried and what we think is effective. We also now have a new member, Sonny. So I'm going to give Sonny a little bit just to kind of introduce himself and just give a little bit of background, and then we can just jump right into it. So without further ado, Sonny, you want to say a couple things just about your background and what kind of brought you here?
Sure. Well, it was Humble Stature that actually brought me here. He dragged me in against my consent. But no, I'm very happy to be here. A truth seeker like everybody else. A bit about me. I live in the UK. I live in London. I work in academia where I've been doing research for about 7 years now. I started off in the biotech industry, then went on to psychedelics for a while, and now just kind of work in general academia, helping students write essays. So at the same time, I'm doing my psychology doctorate, and that's where I met Humble Stature, who obviously thought I could contribute here, so he invited me on. Apart from that, I'm very much interested in spirituality and trying to find out what's going on, find out who I am, what the world is. So yeah, very excited to be here.
If you just want to give a little bit about your spiritual background too, and kind of what systems you've studied and looked into.
Sure. So like a lot of people, I think I was jerked into being interested in spirituality through psychedelics. And before that, I have a Sikh background. So both my parents are Sikhs, and my grandparents are. So I had a bit of kind of theoretical knowledge of religions. I didn't really practice as much, but I became more interested after my first trip. And then I got into Hinduism quite a bit. I had a lot of Hindu friends and kind of Western interpretations of that, including theosophy, which I find very interesting. And then from there, I got into yoga and meditation, and happy to discuss that with everybody today.
Awesome. So yeah, going back to today's topic is kind of on spiritual practices and what's worked for any individual. We can kind of debate some of it too, depending upon who's up for that. For me, so I've tried a lot of different things. I kind of like the way that Hinduism breaks it up, where you have bhakti yoga, which is devotional, karma yoga, and jhana yoga. Karma being, I think of it more as meditation, and then jhana being more the mind, intellect, contemplation, and these sort of practices, and then being kind of three paths that are all three equally valid. I think you usually got to develop in a little bit of all of them, but you tend to have a strength towards one or the other. I think especially for Westerners, jhana yoga and contemplation tends to be more effective. I think people tend to be so mentally active that to calm down and really gain a lot of the deeper states of meditation is quite difficult, even though I think it's necessary at the higher levels. But for the most part, I think really having a space to contemplate different ideas and build out a accurate worldview that you can then, grow with and kind of bounce your ideas around with in order to slowly progress is probably one of the most effective ways of growing if you're inclined to do it that way. And now as I've gotten older, I think I've really kind of fallen more into the Advaita Vedanta camp than anything else, where I really do feel like the dissolving of identifying yourself as the mind, as the body, which is kind of like, I think, a step above just, you just have craving and aversion. You're trying to overcome the fact that you have all these desires. And the next step after, I think, even seeing the desires is like, okay, well, I have attachment to the body itself, the mind itself, the emotions themselves. And a lot of my thought now is around even pain and pleasure kind of being one of the same and being reactive to neither, around just seeing where um, my sense of self is coming from. Sometimes it's coming, a lot of times, mostly with the mind and identifying with ideas. And it's amazing how easy it is to just let things be as soon as you don't feel like you have to defend a certain idea. Part of the reason even why I like kind of feel very happy to discuss everything is just because I don't feel like, in all truth, even though I have strong beliefs, I'm not really attached to it in the same way that someone would who is dogmatic would be. And I find a freedom in that. Um, and so I still meditate. I try to meditate an hour a day, usually 30 minutes in the morning, 30 minutes at night. Um, but a lot of that has just been almost kind of just housekeeping, just enough to clear my mind to kind of make it so I don't sink too much into the world and can still keep a spiritual perspective. But at the end of the day, I think it's more about um, a way of being. And I think when you've done a lot of stuff, it starts to become who you are. And there's a way of just interacting and contemplating constantly that's trying to be developed. And I think I have that to a certain degree. And that's why the main focus of my life has always been around how do I grow and develop spiritually. And it's never really faltered from that. And so that's kind of where I'm at. Anyone else want to jump in?
I suppose I can.
Go for it.
All right. Well, I suppose I should admit that my first spiritual practice or quasi-spiritual practice did involve psychedelics just as a young man before I became a Buddhist, before I was ordained as a monk. I would just go out, hike alone out into a wilderness area and find a really nice place and maybe take a hit or two of acid and maybe do like a little fire sacrifice, trying to imitate in some small way, like a Hindu fire sacrifice or like a Vedic fire sacrifice where I, burn the butter and the honey and the incense and the fire and recite some verses from the Rig Veda and so forth. And I think most of the monks of my generation began with psychedelics or entheogenic substances of some sort, usually something like mushrooms or mescaline or LSD. And the way it works is it's sort of like the way it worked with Ram Dass also, where you attain these states where your consciousness is expanded, and then you get this insight that that your normal waking consciousness isn't really the only valid way of looking at reality. I mean, there might be even more valid ways of looking at reality, or ways of looking at reality that are at least as valid as the normal waking state. And then you want to, once you realize that that is possible, this expanded consciousness, then you try to cultivate that without the use of the chemical. And so a lot of people are drawn to meditation because of that, or at least they were, 20 or 30 years ago. I don't know what it's like nowadays. So after I became a monk, of course, I cleaned up my habits a bit and stopped taking drugs for the most part, and except for maybe Red Bull. And so in Theravada Buddhism, there are two main ways of practice that are emphasized in the text. You've got what is called samatha and vipassana, or it's like a practice dedicated towards samadhi or concentration, and a practice dedicated towards mindfulness. And for the average person living a worldly life surrounded by distractions, the first path of samatha usually doesn't work unless you have like a real talent for it. You just can just sit down and just go into a deep meditative state. And there are people like that, but I wasn't one of them, and I'm still not one of them. And so the samatha method, that's one of the main reasons for becoming a monk, is that you simplify your life so much. You've got so few distractions that you can sit down and cultivate mental states where your mind is just expanded, wide open, and just silent and crystal clear. You know, you're wide awake and you're not thinking anything. And insight can arise from that. Like you just, for example, the insight that arises that you don't cease to exist when you stop thinking. That really is like an important insight that you can experience. But as I say, it doesn't work very well for Westerners who think too much anyway and are living busy lives and are distracted and have all sorts of responsibilities. They don't have the time to meditate full time, which is often what is required. So the other option is mindfulness. And mindfulness is, I mean, it can be practiced anytime doing anything. You can be driving your car and be mindful. You can be brushing your teeth, using the toilet, whatever it is. You can even be indulging in like unskillful actions or immoral actions. You know, you can tell a lie and be mindful. And if you tell a lie mindfully, not that I'm encouraging anyone to tell a lie, but still you'll feel something different inside you and you can get insight from that. And maybe it will encourage you not to tell lies in future or some such. So mainly my practice nowadays is just trying to be as mindful as possible. So like irritation arises, which can often happen. You don't identify with the irritation. You don't just say, I'm irritated. It's just you observe the irritation arising. And there is it's a powerful practice because by noting the irritation, instead of saying I'm pissed, you just are aware that irritation is arising. Then there's already a separation. It's not you're not just sucked into it. There's this philosophical detachment that takes place, and then it weakens it. You're not feeding it like you would be if you just dived into it. So just observing what goes on in your own mind mostly is really a powerful practice, and anybody can do it at just about any time that they're awake. And so that's mainly the practice I've been doing. Although I did do samatha meditation a lot as a monk, but it's as I say, it's much more difficult when you're not a monk anymore or never have been. So that's mainly my practice nowadays. So I think I'll just let somebody else put in their 2 cents worth.
Yeah, thanks. Anyone else?
I can go.
Okay, Sonny, go for it.
I think, again, psychedelics was kind of my doorway in. But before I took my first hit of acid, I was trying to practice various things. I think the internet is not a great thing in that respect because there are so many different techniques, and you going through them all and trying them, not really sure where you're going. I just remember I was sitting there imagining deities and gurus, and then focusing on my breath, and I was just getting very confused. I didn't know what I was going. I didn't really have a framework of reality to work with. I was just kind of sitting there hoping for something to happen. And then it wasn't until I tripped that I had an experiential kind of knowing of reality. I became more intimate with reality, I guess, where all my kind of conceptual stuff and my beliefs dropped away temporarily, and you see things as they are, not entirely as they are, but without that kind of filter of mind distorting it so much. So that really helped me refine my practice, as well as trying to, reading more about different religions and philosophies, and trying to think more about what reality is before I start practicing. I think that was also important for me. And so that helped me to simplify my practice, as I feel that reality is dualistic, in that there is a a subject and an object kind of interacting. And so I kind of thought, well, my practices need to work on that basis in order to kind of see what I really am. I need to kind of divest myself of all the objective stuff. So what I'm saying there is that it's, so subject would be consciousness, object would be body, mind, and you have this kind of crude mixture all piled up together. And so I worked with that and with my experiences with psychedelics to refine my practices. And the two things I do right now is yoga and meditation. And by yoga, I'm referring to more of the asanas. And I do that because I feel for the modern person, the kind of life we live it's not really in line with nature. We've got to work these 9-to-5 jobs, constantly bombarded with stimulus, and our minds are just racing. And so in order for me to sit down and almost divest myself or detach from the objects of experience, it really does take a lot of time, and I can get very frustrated. So the physical aspect of yoga helps with that and allows me to sit down and meditate. So I think that was the kind of path for me. It was figuring out what reality is. I'm not saying I have the answer, but I feel like I'm in a better place than I was, say, 10 years ago. And the experiences I had through psychedelics, I had to get all that in order before I really had a firm foundation for practice in place. So that's my 2 cents.
Awesome. Okay, that just leaves either Truth Matters or SOF.
I guess I'll go. It's kind of a weird question because for me right now, I feel like no practice really works very well. I still do practice the GOENKA Vipassana that I've been doing for a very long time. And it used to be an amazing thing for me. For people who don't know, that's a practice where you focus on the body. So you learn to scan the body, feel the different sensations, and you learn not to react to those sensations with craving or aversion like you normally do. And when you do that, when you're able to just feel, your worst pain and your greatest pleasure as just energy, allowing it to move through your body, it's just, it's absolutely amazing. You let go of so much and you're able to see things as they are, like everyone is saying. Like the dualities of life, different ideas that contradict or like conflicts that you have with people dissolve, and you see different points of view and you see how they both merge together. So it's really beautiful if that really works. But recently it hasn't been working so well for me because when you go deep into the subconscious mind, a lot of emotions come up and you re-experience things from your past as though you were there. So like if you experienced abuse as a child, you might go back into that and re-experience that again. And so the goal is to become equanimous with that, but that's a very hard thing to do. So that's kind of what I'm struggling with right now.
Yeah, for me too. I spent a year at an GOENKA Vipassana center, and after coming back and trying to incorporate in the world, it was just about near impossible. But as I've gotten older, honestly, like now that I've been meditating more consistently and kind of coming at it from a different angle, I feel like it is doable. But it takes a lot, and I don't even know if it's really the problem with the GOENKA is they don't say, oh, this is only right if given certain conditions. It's just, no, this is the way. Like it does get pretty dogmatic, especially as you kind of move up.
They are pretty dogmatic, but why did you have a hard time integrating it into your everyday life?
Because like you were saying, it made me more emotional. I would literally sit and all of a sudden it's like, okay, well now I'm even feeling emotions even more intensely and I can't function as much, or now I want to sleep, or I want to like the stuff that it would bring up, because now I had all these vices. I could go sleep. I could, I don't know, just do anything else.
You want to
besides
escape.
that.
You want to escape those feelings instead of
Yeah.
like confronting them. Yeah, that's the thing. That's the thing about it. Yeah.
And now you have an escape hatch. Like there's so many other things you could do, right? And when I was just at the retreat center, there was nowhere else to go. It was like, okay, either you're, meditating are going to be sweeping and cleaning and cooking or something, right? And it's like, or just sit in your room alone on your bed or something, right? Like, but
Yeah.
I mean, also too, I think I was getting like definitely like diminishing returns too, because it is like a matter of you experience these really high states, but then you also on some level, I think, no, you can't chase states. Like, to live in that space probably isn't the most practical, because I think as long as you have karma and you have things you're dealing with emotionally that keep coming up, you're going to be going on this roller coaster. I think it's going to be a lot of ups and downs. And I had to find something a little bit more balanced. Also, too, I think I've never been someone that can compartmentalize. Really, it's kind of just all there. Like if I'm sad or happy, I think that people that even the ones that I feel like can just meditate and they're fine, they go off to their regular life or whatever, are usually people that are very compartmentalized, which I don't think is necessarily a good thing.
What do you mean by
Um,
compartmentalize? Like if you feel all the sorts of strong emotions coming out while you're meditating, you put them aside and then you go do your daily.
Yeah. Or even it's like, meditation is for when you're meditating and whatever comes up there and they just put it all to the side. I think a lot of people too. I mean, I always thought if you're meditating 12 hours a day on a meditation retreat, I mean, everyone would have similar experiences. And even when I talk to people after the retreat, like 9 times out of 10, there was just really wasn't nearly as much. They didn't have the same experience I had, especially on the level of like insight or doing like even transformation, I guess you would say. You know it, it's like, I don't know, in the beginning, especially as a Western, you think, okay, well, when you get exposed to Buddhism, if you just meditate enough, you'll reach enlightenment. If you just sit on your butt with your eyes closed enough and go inside, everything gets purified, you'll be done, and you're going to reach enlightenment. I just don't think it's so black and white. um is that, and I just kind of think I also lost faith that if I just meditate, because also too, when I was meditating like 12 hours a day at the Vipassana, it's like, okay, well, I was meditating 12 hours in a row pretty much during that time. And it's like, okay, well, what type of work am I really doing even coming back? So I'm uncomfortable, I have anxiety, and I'm bored. And yeah, I could sit through this for an hour, but then what's really the payoff is I go back into the world, I'm going to be distracted again, my mind gets active, and then I come back and I'm going to sit here another hour and be bored. And it just, I guess, never really felt like I was going to be able to even progress in that way through just using that technique. Um, Maybe that's part of it. I don't know if you guys want to
Well,
jump in on this.
well, I mean, if you were just sitting there feeling bored, that would be kind of not doing it correctly. I mean, you're supposed to not react to it, like just treat it as a sensation and let it be. I actually had it be very effective for a while I was living in the world. I was very disciplined at that time. So
Hmm.
I was really disciplined about like confronting all of my feelings, and it felt like I was able to clear out a lot of stuff. But yeah, I find it very difficult now.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
oh,
yeah,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that meditation at first, you're just clearing off the debris. It's relatively easy at first if you're doing it right, and then once you've gotten down to the bedrock, once you've gotten down into the deep stuff, it does get a lot more difficult, and it can be very frustrating. But
Yep,
then
that's my experience.
you just note the frustration. That's what a Mahasi instructor would say. Just note it, and then
Yeah.
send you back.
I mean, even for you, Pano, though, wasn't there like a time with even though all the meditating, being a monk and all that, I mean, where you kind of felt like you'd reached what you could reach using what you knew, especially with meditation? Or like, I don't know. I remember we kind of had some discussions about that. I was curious what your thoughts were now.
Yeah, I felt like I had gotten about as far as I was likely to get by meditating alone in caves. So it just seemed like it was time to take what I had learned and move on to like a higher difficulty setting, or just a change of pace, something different. Because obviously, if you're doing the same thing over and over again, and it's just consistently has stopped working, then it's time to try something else.
Hmm.
So that's what I did. And I would mention that there are a few other practices that can be done relatively easily in everyday life. One is mantra, where, I mean, you don't have to be sitting cross-legged with your eyes closed to be repeating a mantra. Just, keeping your mind focused on just a series of syllables that acts as like a carrier wave, just keeping your mind from being all distracted and going in all directions. At least, you're still thinking, but it's just this one repeating thought that's keeping your mind relatively controlled. So, um, Long ago, I just started spontaneously oming sometimes, especially if I'm walking or like waiting in line, like at the at the DMV or something. Just om will just start spontaneously coming up, which it is nice, and it's not a very deep meditation, but it's I mean, it's obviously better than just like fantasizing or whatever it is.
Yeah, stabilizing. Sounds like.
Yeah.
Okay, Alex, you want to jump in? You
Yeah, sorry, a little bit of a delay there. I'm shaking like a French soldier at the moment. Yeah, look, for me, I'll just reiterate kind of what everyone else is saying in a way. These days, I tend to split up meditation into two different things or different ways, I guess. And I think there's a meditation that you're all referring to, which is when you're sitting there watching yourself, observing sensations and that kind of thing. I guess that kind of Vipassana style of thing, which for me was actually largely body work through a Reichian frame. I don't know if you guys know much about Wilhelm Reich and his body work approach, which is basically just repurposed Buddhism and yogic practice as far as I'm concerned. But then there's the other element that I discovered more recently, which is, I guess, the so-called non-dual or direct pointing approach. And this for me was a game changer. The body work always felt kind of dualistic for me. And I did get some benefit from it, but it still felt dualistic in the sense that I think that there was a subject and object for all those years. And there was a split because of that. And I still practice this kind of meditation, this kind of body work. I still do it. I don't think it's totally useless. But I do actually think that it can get in the way of having a non-dual realization, because it is inherently a dualistic way of approaching reality and the body. And once I had I suppose what you call a glimpse, what they call a glimpse through Dzogchen kind of style direct pointing, that was a game changer for me, was when I had that non-dual glimpse. And then everything I'd been doing contextually started to make sense. So what I do these days is I practice like these non-dual approaches like Dzogchen, koan practice for me. I often do koan practice because I feel like it jars me into that non-dual perception. And in a way, when I had that glimpse, it recontextualized sitting on a cushion for 12 hours a day. And all of a sudden I realized that in a sense, you don't really need to do that. You can access this at any time without having to sit down and close your eyes. Having said all this, I still think you guys are talking about GOENKA. And of course, I've just been talking about body work. I still think those things can make a difference, and they can make your experience better if approached in the right way. Reichian therapy and body work, I feel, can really change your character, and it can really shape your experience of the world for the better. But ironically, I really feel like they almost just get in the way from a non-dual perspective. And it's almost like you don't really need it, I feel. Just kind of a controversial statement. But anyway, that's been my experience over the last couple of years.
Can you describe a little bit how you do the Reichian therapy? Because I've read a little bit about it, but I just wanted to hear how you practiced it.
Yeah, sure. Well, it ties into some other stuff that I'm doing as well. So, for example, I'm about to release a handbook on breathing in a particular Japanese style. But Reichian therapy is essentially a long-term process where you change the way that you breathe and really change how your muscles are coordinated and how they work together in a way. I'd say that's the essence of it. And the theory is then that changes your character structure, I think is what Reich himself referred to it as. And yeah, it's primarily done through the manipulation of breath and certain special exercises that are really quite hard to do. So for example, you're meant to breathe in a specific way, and then you'll do exercises with your eyes, and that's designed to use your eyes in ways that you perhaps haven't done before with an oxygenated body. And the theory is that then that breaks up at least what he called character armor, which is quote unquote how we protect ourselves from the world with our character. And it's meant to open up your character. And some people use this for neurotic problems, but I always approach it more from a how would you describe it? A way to open myself up and to change myself deliberately, if that makes sense. A way so I could stop getting in my own way. I'm sorry, maybe that's a little bit incoherent, but yeah, we could go into the specifics of the techniques sometime if you like, but really it's a way of refining your breath and then refining your movement around that breath. So it's quite yogic, really. And it's my contention that Reich stole, not stole, but reappropriated a lot of these exercises from the East into his own paradigm, in my opinion. But yeah, in essence, I hope that makes sense. That's kind of what it is.
And then you incorporate that to your own Zen breathing type of thing you're talking about now with this book. If you just want to, I mean, I'm still kind of not sure how that, what you're doing with that.
Yeah. So what I discovered is the breath is very important. I think we all know that nowadays. And I came across something in my Zen practice called Hara breathing or Tanden breathing. And it's very interesting. I've done a couple of videos on it, but essentially before the Meiji Restoration in Japan, the Japanese character was quite strange. They considered the seat of consciousness essentially in a very specific area in the gut and in the solar plexus. And they had a very specific way of breathing, particularly the samurai class and other people like that. And they'd identified an area below the belly button, essentially, that very low area when you breathe into your gut. They identified that as a very important place, which is obviously why they stabbed themselves in it when they committed suicide. But they all breathed very deep into that area. And there's a lot to it. I won't go into it now, but the book is about restoring that type of breathing, that low belly breathing as a basis for your entire character and your entire being, and the profound changes that can have on your character as a person. And it's interesting, the Japanese, as soon as they industrialized and they started adopting Western habits, for example, sitting in an office, wearing belts, sitting on chairs, all those kinds of things, and they lost this way of breathing, they experienced all sorts of, I would say, less than stellar changes in their culture, and all sorts of symptoms, depressive symptoms, that they referred to as neurasthenia at the time, which was kind of like what we call chronic fatigue nowadays. And it's actually well documented. There are a lot of Japanese scientists at the time that documented this, and they actually tried to reinstate this way of abdominal breathing. So anyway, this all sort of ties in together, that I do think the body is important, but then from a direct pointing perspective, the non-dual perspective, in a way, ironically, none of that matters either. But this kind of gets complicated and difficult to talk about. But I kind of have that approach now. These two things are what I use on a daily basis.
Yeah, I would agree with SOFcast with that, with this statement that, like meditation techniques that still involve thinking and perception can almost be in the way, because there's still samsaric. There may be improving your samsaric habits, but it's still samsaric and worldly in a way. And if you ever really get into a deep contemplative state, like a mystical state, like the Catholic contemplatives called contemplation, where you're no longer thinking, you're just crystal clear, then just 30 seconds of that is worth 20 years of the Mahasi method, just noting and just grinding away, maybe doing, struggling and floundering, from time to time. Just 30 seconds of just like a deep mystical state is worth 20 years of the other stuff. But as I say, most Western people, just most human beings, can't really cultivate that easily. You know, most people who even dedicate their lives to cultivating it never really master it. And so I think most people in the West that have a really deep mystical experience have it by accident, or they have it through psychedelics or something, or you know, they have like a near death experience or some such. And it does seem that a lot of the teachers who are teaching nowadays that have attained something supposedly higher, like Eckhart Tolle, for example, it was accidental. He wasn't trying to cultivate this at all. It's just he just had some sort of deep depressive existential crisis that just slammed him out of his normal state of consciousness. But you can't really plan on that. And so we practice instead, because we can't just wait around for some near-death experience to happen to us.
I mean, I think one good frame is just to go with what's real too. I mean, what feels the most real. I think for some people, if duality and working with some sort of god or goddess or this type of thing feels more real to you, it feels experientially more real, then I would say go with it. And if that starts feeling less real, and then say like just being starts feeling more real, like something more abstract or what sounds very abstract starts feeling more real than interacting with his being or interacting with a mantra, then I would say go with that. I think there really is something to like following this feeling of realness. I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah, to some degree, you have to just follow your intuition or just what feels right.
Mhm.
But and there is somewhat of a dilemma. It's like you're using the deluded or unenlightened mind to choose the correct method, or else you're just choosing a guru to choose for you, or else you're just falling back on, you know, the religion of your culture or some such. So I mean, it is difficult to really know what to do. I mean, because even if you follow your own intuition, which, you know, may be the most reliable guide, still, I mean, you know, we're unenlightened, and so we have unenlightened intuition.
Mm-hmm.
But what else do you have? You have to follow that.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say something a little bit controversial. I actually think that collapsing the subject and object, so having a non-dual glimpse, is actually probably more accessible than what most people think. And there's, as I said, with Dzogchen, for example, and there's also other practitioners that do some variation of that these days, like the so-called direct pointing approach. I actually think it's quite accessible for most people. And once you have that realization, I'm not saying that you're fully cooked, like you're always going to walk around in that state of mind, which is a different thing entirely. But yeah, I think these days having that non-dual realization, where that sense of seeking, of always seeking something out of that dissatisfaction that you have, can dissipate fairly easily. And once you have that glimpse, you can use that direct approach whenever you're in some sort of a weird emotional state, or you're angry at work or whatever it is, and it's always there. It's always kind of accessible. I don't know if you guys have any experience with that kind of.
I actually have had many such experiences with Vipassana, but I don't find them to be all that accessible. Like I can't will it, if that's what you mean by accessible.
Sure. Well, so what for me, Vipassana always got in the way for me. When I did Dzogchen for the first time, and I had someone do the pointing, which is where it's difficult to describe without actually doing the exercise, but I found that to be way more effective because they literally point out non-duality to you in a very direct way. Whereas I find that more traditional forms of meditation, you're just sitting there observing things and you're expected to just have the experience. Whereas in the Tibetan traditions, and I guess arguably also in Zen, they try to induce that direct perception very deliberately, which is a vastly different way of approaching meditation, I've found.
Oh, that's fascinating.
I'd recommend that to anyone out there that is interested to look into the Dzogchen non-dual pointing approach. It's been a game changer for me when I first had that glimpse.
I guess for me with the non-dual stuff, I think there is something to building a foundation first, like intellectually, emotionally, spiritually understanding different practices. I think the thing is, it doesn't. If you have a non-dual experience and there's no foundation for it, it's kind of like the people most people I think would say who just do mushrooms and then it never ends up in any sort of spiritual practice whatsoever, which is more common than not, right? It's like they just do mushrooms, they have this amazing experience, and it only means something to the degree which I think they've already been developed, and then it can be transformational. But like even within Buddhism, I mean, they kind of start with morality and then say, okay, well, start with understanding the basis of morality, understanding what mindfulness is, and start doing some meditation. And then eventually, as you go into deeper states, you'll start going to more and more non-dual states. But it's just like,
I think I know what you're trying to say.
yeah,
So if you don't struggle with dualistic approaches for a long time, and then you have a direct experience, then it can be lost on you, actually. And I've heard people that have not done much meditation, that have gone to one of these classes, and they've probably had a glimpse, but they literally can't conceive of what's just happened to them. They don't really understand how spectacular what they've just experienced is. It's kind of like, yeah, like whatever kind of thing.
well, I
Whereas
think
someone who's struggled for a lot of years, I really think that when you have that experience, you go like, whoa, that's
well, no, what I
crazy.
think it actually what it is unless you're established there, it's useless. Like if you went even with drugs and you had this amazing experience one night where you felt like you were, God basically, at the end of the day, after a week later, you're just back to being you. So unless you're dealing with something that's actually changing your experience of yourself and your reality on a day-to-day basis because it's so profound and deep and it can actually penetrate your mind that deeply, it's not worth much. And that's why I think the incremental approach usually, like there, even within the incremental approach, there's paradigm shifts. And what you're kind of explaining is like the moment of a paradigm shift. And that's powerful. But I think usually it's like unless you built up to that where you also did all the other stuff, like I'm a big fan. I'm a big, I guess, a big believer, not a fan, that you can't skip steps on the spiritual path. I really think that you have to pretty much hit every single step, but you can kind of do them in different orders to some degree. But that there's nothing that can be skipped, and that's why even if someone's really like developed a lot of times, on a lot of different levels, you can see some chink in their armor that allows for some sort of defilement or something to take them out of the game a lot of times. And that's usually because there's not enough of a fundamental basis that allows for the consistency or the personality or all these other developments. Because I really do think it's a very, one thing even with the non-dual stuff is everything appears and is, I think, ultimately very holistic. Like you can't just separate these higher spiritual experiences without having a higher physical experience, emotional, mental. They all have to synchronize in order for the non-dual experience to ultimately become a part of you and to become something which you can now function at, you know. And I think that's the critical factor. That's why I think it is, quite hard, and why you have a lot of even this new age stuff, because you have a lot of, drugs are quite accessible, and even a lot of different materials philosophically are quite accessible. But more often than not, everyone wants to do the thing which is easy. And I think it's the path, especially if you're really doing very serious spiritual work, is usually the experience, at least, I mean, in my perspective, is that you're dying because the part of you in which you're identified is changing or being let go of, and that creates an experience of death. And it takes quite a lot of character, I think, to persevere through that, and that's usually what's missing.
Can I make a comment here?
Yeah, go for it, Ty.
So it seems to me there are like 3 different ways you can get to that place, get back to yourself. I mean, as we said, there are people that have almost fallen into enlightenment without any practice at all, where it just happens suddenly without any prior, meditative practice or anything. And there are those that take a more progressive route, where they, develop certain virtues and purify their mind, and it's almost like clearing the waters, so the ocean reveals itself, albeit quite slowly. And then there is the kind of direct way that we just spoke about, which is, you know, Advaita Vedanta, the non-dual stuff, where it's direct pointing, self-inquiry, and all of that. And it seems to me that, like, why can't we just mix and match? So direct pointing for me and self-inquiry, I find it helpful during meditation practice, and it doesn't work for everybody, but it's almost like a quick unraveling. So when your consciousness is like really, when your thoughts are really sticky and you can't kind of detach from them, you can use self-inquiry. And by self-inquiry, I guess there are different ways. You know, there's the neti saying that this is not me, this is not me. The body is not me, mind is not me, the thought's not me. And then there's the other kind of way where you ask yourself various questions like, what am I, who am I aware? And that is supposed to take you to an experience of being very quickly and very directly. And I think that that's useful now and again, but I think if you use that as your only practice, I think you become very prone to this kind of pseudo awakening where you're going there very quickly, and it's without the kind of progressive route and the foundations there in the first place. I think you can get very lost, and I can see why it's very attractive, because I mean, these days with the internet, as I mentioned, spirituality, there's this big sales pitch about enlightenment. You know, you're going to have this amazing feeling, all your suffering is going to be gone. And so everyone's now getting on the path and want to get there very quickly. And it's the way the society is, you know, I want everything right here, right now. So I think the direct path is becoming quite popular, but I think it's also very prone to traps and getting lost. So I don't see why we can't mix and match. At the same time, I do feel that for some people, they can have an experience of enlightenment without any practice at all. They just seem to fall into it. I once met a lady, and I do believe her. I know her quite well. She's in her 80s, who had a non-dual experience while watching TV. And I assume that's because she was so relaxed, and she just kind of fell into pure awareness, and it just happened. And she did have, you know, she was practicing for many years, not aggressively, but now and again. So yeah, different things work for different people. Sometimes I feel like it's not even in our hands, and that it's all, you know, it will come to us when we're ready.
Yeah, I definitely believe in a comparative religion approach too. That's why I like Ralph Waldo Emerson quite a lot, because he kind of studied everything and pulled from what he thought was the best. And I think it keeps you, from becoming too dogmatic or becoming dogmatic, which is also a danger too. Anyway, do you want to say something too, Panu? Yeah, jump in.
Yeah, I agree that, I mean, different people have different temperaments and respond better to different systems. This is why you've got different kinds of yoga. You know, you've got bhakti and karma and jnana and karma, raja yoga, and just some people are more intellectual, more head oriented. You know, they might prosper better under a more philosophical approach. Other people are more heart oriented, and again, some people may have done a lot of work in a previous existence, like Ramana Maharshi, one of the greatest saints of the 20th century. He was just a relatively normal high school kid who had like a panic attack, and he just laid down. He felt like he was going to die. So he was doing his homework alone in his house. He starts having this panic attack, feeling like he's going to die. So he just prepares for death, just lies down, stops thinking, you're preparing for death, and that was it. Just boom. So I mean, different paths work for different people. Like the path of Theravada Buddhism, in which you have to be a full-blown saint in order to become enlightened. You have to have purity of morals before you can have purity of mind. And on the other hand, you've got someone like Krishnamurti, who is just like a rascal. So I think It is kind of complicated, and one of the best things a person can do is just expose themselves to, you know, many different spiritual systems and points of view, just until one clicks, until one really feels right. You know, like I was reading all kinds of things, reading Mahayana and Theravada and Hinduism and Christianity and just about anything I could get my hands on when I was a younger man. And something like the Atthakavagga and the Sutta Nipata it just felt so right. It just clicked, you know? And it was like, yeah, that's right. And at first, you might not be able to really make sense of it. It's like as a teenager, a youth counselor gave me books by Ram Dass to read. And it was so alien to anything I'd read before. I couldn't really integrate it into my body of knowledge. You know, it was like in order to really absorb something, you have to, you know, link it to other things that you know. And it was so different, so alien that I couldn't really integrate it. And so I hardly remembered anything that I read after I finished the book, but still it was just this intuitive feeling that there's something to this. And it's good even to expose yourself to points of view that are just radically different from what you choose to believe. Just I mean, you can just feel pain, you know, watching some, you know, some YouTube video or reading some book where they're just saying stuff that you consider to be just absolutely false. But still, it's good to exercise some patience and endure that, and you know, insight can arise from that also. But reading a lot or just exposing yourself to different philosophies and so forth can be very useful, unless it just confuses you, makes things worse.
I mean, and debate and discussion too is a big part of it. That's why even like with this group or talking about different ideas, I think a lot of times too, it's easy to just convince yourself of something alone in your room with a book. But if you have to discuss it and explain it, I mean, you know, because I grew up basically in a Hindu ashram and then came over here and then got into Buddhism and Native American stuff, I always had to defend every single idea. There's no one else pretty much around me that ever thought the way I thought. And so I had to figure out ways of articulating and discussing and think about it deeply because I was always being challenged. And you know, I think going places where you're, you know, if you feel called to it, like even, you know, it's funny today, just because I've been wanting to be around more conservative, a conservative spiritual environment. I actually ended up going to church over here where I live, which is kind of fun. Just why not? I mean, it's better than going out to some club or going out drinking. I figure meet some people, have some fun, hear what they have to say. And I honestly had a good time. And so my point is that I really do agree that if you can, you know, one of my favorite quotes by Ralph Waldo Emerson is God will not have his work be made manifest by cowards. And I do think there's a certain amount of courage, both in being able to challenge your ideas, courage in being exposed to new things. And really, like, I think even me, you know, a lot of us share this sort of thing of not being afraid of any idea, not being afraid to really look inside too. Because if you're afraid of things out here and what people believe, you're definitely afraid internally. And I think, you know, you have to become, there's a certain amount of bravery to spiritual work because also it's very disorienting at times, especially if you're really doing it seriously. Like, I mean, even the times when I was a monk or the times where I was really getting into some sort of new ideas, I mean, I didn't know who I was. I didn't know why I was doing what I was doing. It's such a, it turns your whole world upside down. And you have to basically rebuild that world while you're trying to live in it. And that takes a lot of courage, you know? So that's another point I just wanted to throw out there. If anyone has, we can go on for a couple more minutes. Otherwise, I kind of want just to touch more on psychedelics and stuff, unless someone wanted to say another thing about this.
Can I just mention one thing?
Yeah, go for
it. So yeah, outside of, you know, purposeful periods of sitting and meditating and doing your practice, I think just everyday life is a spiritual practice. I think if you wake up in the morning and you just purely through intention, you know, live your life. And see life as a very, you know, sacred and precious thing. I often have experiences, you know, just encountering other people where you do feel almost like a real sense of connection with others and everything around you. And it just shows that, you know, we are already that. It's that peace and happiness is what we really are. And it's these encounters in life sometimes can divest all that it can kind of remove the clouds temporarily and let it shine. And that doesn't have to be confined to sitting down and meditating. It can happen, you know, in everyday relationships, or even walking in nature, just very regular things. So I think, you know, your entire life can be a spiritual practice. I guess the goal is to be in that meditative state all the time. But I think even if you're not doing that, life has a way of pointing to things without you, you know, sitting down and looking. It's just kind of revealing itself, and can be quite surprising at times. So yeah.
When you're really talking about like for the spiritually minded individual, because obviously too, you have plenty of people that are just, I mean, they just, how would you say, not decompose, but like some sort of like moral decay because they never actually, and I feel like it's the majority, you know, that the majority of people are, you know, living lives of quiet desperation, as they say, too. And that, so it's just like throughout their lives, I would love to believe that everyone's growing spiritually. I just don't believe it's true. I think there's a small minority of people who have a spiritual perspective in which everything can be incorporated for growth, but that it's few and far between. I don't know if you agree with that, but
I think most people are running on automatic pilot almost all the time. So that is an important aspect of spirituality, is trying to turn off the automatic pilot, or you know, transcend it, go above that. So just as long as you're conscious, as long as you're mindful, you know, trying to make a little effort of, you know, just being aware of what you're doing, and not just living your life through, you know, force of habit. That's one of the most important aspects of just basic spirituality, or even just a religious and ethical life.
yeah. So with that said, we have like maybe like 10 minutes. I just kind of wanted to get in a little bit into the psychedelics as far as how it relates to spirituality and practice. I got 420 coming up. So even though honestly, weed has been like the least favorite drug out of every drug, it's just, I don't know. I always felt like it decreased my capacities, whether it be memory or my ability to think clearly. And that just was such a turnoff. But I get it. I have a lot of friends that are very much love weed. And so nonetheless, but I will say that I have done ayahuasca twice, did mushrooms, acid once, both those just once. Um, and maybe a couple other things here and there, but only very rare occasions. And I've kind of come to the conclusion after all of this that I really do think that what it does is, for most people, it opens you up to like it creates a clear channel where you can experience higher divine realities. But I think there's always a cost. I don't think it's it for free, and especially people that are, you know, consistent users or long-time users. I find that they start to lose grip on reality, and that their ego starts to deteriorate in a way that isn't conducive to reaching higher states of consciousness. Carl Jung talked a lot about having to reach, have a very developed ego, and then eventually at the later stages, it was you were at the stage of transcendence, and about. And I think a lot of the problem is people, without forming a strong identity, you don't have a vehicle in which you can use, in some sense, to take you to a state where you're ultimately established in divinity. Instead, you're kind of shredding up the cart you need to get there on your own, or the vehicle you need to get there on your own. And that's why I so many people that I've met that do a lot of that stuff, generally I feel like are regressing versus progressing on the spiritual path, despite their insight and despite their languaging a lot of times. And this took a long time. I mean, I never took this lightly, but it's taken me a lot of time to debate and think about. Anyway, I just took up like 3 minutes, so I'll let you guys also jump in here.
Well, anything can be abused. I met this woman who did ayahuasca regularly. She would go to these ceremonies, and it was like she had to use it as a kind of catharsis just to get back to normal. And then the crap would start building up again, and then she'd do another ceremony, which would just sort of you know, vent all this darkness and stuff that she had inside. And something like that, yeah, it just becomes almost like a vicious circle where you know, you eventually the drug is just causing you to be messed up in a slightly different way. And so, I mean, there is that. Even Ram Dass, who started off with psychedelics, said that he was having difficulty with deep meditation. And one of his teachers told him it was all the acid that he took, back in the 60s when he was experimenting with that sort of thing. But still, for a lot of people, like I said earlier on, it was most of the monks of my generation, the Western ones, I mean, they tended to start out with some kind of psychedelics just to give them a taste of what higher consciousness, expanded consciousness is like, and then they try to move on and cultivate the same states without the aid of chemicals. But with regard to cannabis, my experience is that it doesn't really cause my consciousness to be more or less expanded. It's still relatively the same quality of conscious as if I'm not high, but it's just a different kind of consciousness. It's obviously your short-term memory is wrecked, but that helps you to be in the present moment more easily, that sort of thing. But getting back to like the more powerful psychedelics, one of the most common experiences that I have is just seeing everything as a theist would say God, a manifestation of God. You just feel that everything you're looking at is just some aspect of God. Everything is just like glowing with divinity. And it's nice. And if someone just has an experience like that and they can't really integrate it and they just sort of forget it, then I mean, still it's lingering there somewhere. But if you can remember that and sort of use that as just sort of like a sailor looks at the horizon, just sort of something that you can fall back on and remind yourself, there is a higher level of consciousness than the one we're currently stuck in. And it's always there. I mean, anyone who has had a non-dual experience knows that, I mean, that non-dual state of consciousness is always there. We're just so distracted with our thoughts that we don't notice it most of the time.
Awesome. I mean, yeah, Sonny, you want to jump in? You're basically an expert on this topic.
Yeah, I guess there's two sides of the coin here. In terms of spirituality, I think it's useful for people to have at least one trip. And I think that's important because we often get lost in concepts and theories and ideas that we read and are told. So having a direct experience of dissolving your mind and your ego can be very useful. Because essentially when you trip at a high dose, that is, it's almost as if like the mind thins out or gets dissolved, and that's what creates illusion, right? Maya it's our mind that can kind of filters our perception of reality. So once you're divested of that, you have a more intimate experience of what you really are and what the world really is, and you do feel that connection to everything. So in terms of spirituality, I think it can be useful to have a couple of trips just to kind of clear away some stuff that you've been holding on to. Outside of spirituality, I think they are useful for various traumas, alongside a trained therapist. Research has been shown that they're useful for addictions, tobacco and alcohol especially, and those that have like mental health issues at the end of their life. So either end of their life through age or because they have a life-threatening condition. So those are the kind of positives, I would say. And on the flip side, you always have to come down, right? It's an artificial experience, so you always have to come down. And reality, well, for me, when I come down, reality seems very plain and boring and 3D. And it can stir up a bit of depression for a while, actually. And then you find yourself constantly chasing states and needing that again and again. And I mean, pharmacologically, they are not listed as addictive substances, but I think that you can become reliant on them for these higher states. And that can then spill into your spiritual practice, that you are seeking the state that you achieved, 3 weeks ago on 3 tabs of acid. Ultimately, I think reality and consciousness is not a state. So I think you are going to hit a dead end there. So that's my opinion on psychedelics.
And
Very
two,
quickly.
just because you actually done clinical research on this.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you could just say a little bit about that, just so the audience knows.
Okay. So there's a lot of research going on at the moment. I worked at Imperial College, where they're looking at psilocybin and DMT and LSD. So DMT and LSD are primarily being researched, not for clinical purposes, but just they dose people up and put them in brain scanners to see what it does to the brain. And psilocybin's been used more for a clinical purpose. So we're using it for depression that's difficult to treat with antidepressants. And so I was involved in that study. So you had to have failed at least 2 conventional antidepressants, and then you had 2 doses of psilocybin 6 weeks apart with therapy. And what we found is, even after 6 months, the positive results were sustained, but after a year follow-up, they did diminish. But I do feel that it's better than what we are using at the moment. Taking antidepressants every day is not the best thing for your health. So a couple of trips with a therapist, I think, will do a lot more good, depending on the person, obviously, and their situation. And DMT, I don't think it's therapeutic. I think we are just interested in it as a chemical, and in terms of the experience it can produce. Usually people find themselves leaving their body, and we did a study where we looked at the phenomenology of that and compared it to a near-death experience, and found that 14 out of 16 items, I believe, or 13 or 14 crossed over. So there were a lot of similarities. You had the going through the tunnel, crossing to into a different terrain, leaving your body, experiencing contact with entities, all that stuff. But there were some components missing. Obviously, this is a chemical, artificially induced. And then LSD, because of all the crap, all the stigma around it from the 60s, we are not using that in a clinical way. It's more just see what it does to the brain. And so, yeah, that's what's going on. It's all going on all over the world. I mean, Brazil, America, Switzerland, UK. So it's an exciting time for psychedelics. And I think it's going to revolutionize mental health, for sure. And more people will take them. It's going to become commercialized, which is unfortunate, but I think that's the only way that we're going to move forward. And yeah, privatization is not the great thing. They're already trying to patent mushrooms, which is ridiculous. But sometimes you has to go through this period before it becomes widely available to everyone. And that's a different debate, obviously, because that can cause good and bad things in the world.
Yeah, awesome. Do you want to say something, Alex? I know you unmuted yourself there for a bit.
Yeah, just quickly. I've done it a little bit. It was interesting you were saying, Sonny, that it's a good idea maybe to do these things with a therapist so you can integrate the experience. I've come across a lot of people that use psychedelics as a crutch, and I think it's made them worse in a lot of cases. Yeah, they can be quite dangerous. I feel like some people don't respect their power, and yeah, I really feel that element of using a therapist, even maybe not having someone there while you're doing it, but if you go to Peru or something, when you come back, it's probably useful to talk through the experience with someone. For a lot of people, I think, which with the ayahuasca tourism and that kind of stuff, I don't see much of that happening. But I feel like the power of the experience itself justifies that for many people. Otherwise, yeah, I've just noticed the effects can be not necessarily good for a lot of people.
How about you, Julie? Anything else you want to add?
I think we've covered all the bases. I've done all the psychedelics and had the same experience as you guys and all the same insights into it. As in, it's a really good starting point. It's fantastic. I think everyone should do it. But yeah, it can't be a spiritual practice. That I I was in the ayahuasca community, and then people there claim to use it as a regular spiritual practice. Maybe that was okay in the Santo Daime community, but that was kind of organized. There was like, it was kind of like a church, kind of like a church where you go and you do ayahuasca, and a whole community of people. People who do it on their own, I have found, are not very stable, and I don't think it does good things for them in the long term.
Yeah, I mean, I probably am more cynical about it, but I do really appreciate your perspective, Sonny, on this. I mean, I do get the clinical stuff, and as someone that was, in a psychology program, also studying a lot of this, I mean, it does seem like there might be some benefit, at the very least, just being better than a lot of these harder drugs with dealing with psychological problems, with certain types of psychological problems. So, yeah, that's good. Um, but I don't know if even, I had a friend, I literally had him do an acid trip because I was like, okay, well, this will help him be more spiritual. And it kind of backfired. And I was like, huh, it made me question, I mean, maybe it's the wrong time, wrong place, but, I think that I don't think I would recommend it to anyone anymore at this point. Um, but if someone really called and wanted to do it, I don't think I could discourage them either. Because even when I did all my other spiritual work and hadn't touched any of this stuff, you'd always hear people say, "Oh, you don't understand. You don't understand. You have to go do it." And then once I did it, I kind of realized, for the most part, it's because they've never reached higher states within meditation that they think that this is the end all be all. And that's usually how I feel when I talk to most people who've done psychedelics or had experiences, unless they can really say, "Hey, this was just a great experience and it pushed me towards, wanting to seek the truth because I realized there was another side," then wonderful. But otherwise, I think it mostly doesn't do much, if anything, spiritually. I wish it did. I wish there was just a shortcut. You just take some mushrooms and voila, you've reached, this higher dimension. But I don't think it's real. And real in the sense of permanent, lasting spiritual progress. So before we conclude, anyone else want to jump in, say anything? Is everyone good?
Well, I would point out that maybe unfortunately psychedelics are more reliable than meditation, because you take the 2 tabs of acid or whatever it is, you got a pretty good idea of what's going to happen. Whereas with meditation, you can be just striving for years and still not attain a mystical state similar to the 2 hits of acid. So, I mean, there is that, although all in all, I do consider meditation and just spiritual practice in general, the more orthodox spiritual practices, to be far superior, because then it's not, artificial, like Sonny was saying, and it's more organic, and it's coming from within yourself more than, coming from some artificial chemical.
Yeah, I just think the discipline is just as important as any experience. And I just don't know if you build the discipline through that like you would through regular spiritual practices. And I think it's a critical factor, especially in the long term. You know, even within I really do believe there's such things as like these within the ayahuasca community, with even in Peru or all this stuff, almost like witch doctor-esque people that do a lot of this stuff, develop certain psychic powers and then use it for certain reasons. Same thing in Africa. They have like witch doctors that do certain things like that. And I think it's real. I think there's some legitimacy to it. Um, and I think a lot of these people don't understand the realms in which they're moving to. And if you're just naive and go into a lot of these different spaces that psychedelics can take you, they're also very dangerous. And I feel like the cost to benefit thing is, if you're already a very strong soul to some degree, I think, very strong individual from past lives and already have a lot of good karma, then I think probably you can, get through that with flying colors. But for the average person, I don't know. I really question if that's the case nowadays.
Yeah, I agree. People have a very naive context when it comes to ayahuasca, I feel. Anthropologically, there's a darker context to these kinds of things, right? Like the shamans aren't always sweetness and light, put it that way. Yeah, brujas and all sorts of weird shit going on.
Yeah.
And as you say, I think like a lot of people go to these countries and they're like just doing this stuff and they think everything's sweetness and light and all this kind of stuff. But the world's not that way, right?
And then with the
Yeah.
same thing, I
Sorry.
can't say I ever had a trip that I would want to give up, or that I thought it was like, I mean, especially when I ended up doing mushrooms, I thought was probably the best out of all of them, to be honest. And I felt like that was really um, something. Even with the ayahuasca, I thought it was a pretty good experience overall. I just don't think for the average person it's gonna be. I think that I'm kind of an exception too, because I've done so much meditation even prior to doing this stuff. Like anyone that had a strong meditations practice and was very strong, I'd say, hey, go do it. It doesn't really matter all that much. But if you're trying to do it in order to get to spirituality or experience something, I feel like, oh man, you're running a lot of risks. I guess that's how I feel about it. Like for experienced meditators, I wouldn't really, think much of it. Yeah, go do it if you were interested in it. But for everyone else, it'd be like, you should probably get to the meditation part first. Get that down first. Some sort of mental control, some sort of mental awareness and philosophical understanding of the world. And then, okay, fine, go do some experimenting. And I don't think it'll do much, but yeah, I guess that's my position now.
Well, I think we're done.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Wonderful. Well, thank you guys for watching our now third podcast. Thank you, Sonny, for being here. He was going to hopefully be our new regular. And may you all be happy, peaceful, and liberated. Thank you so much.